Welcome to Newsmaker. I'm your host, Dawn Jones. Since last month's Parkland, Florida school shooting that left 17 people dead, a heated debate is waging among parents on how best to protect their children. In Clio, the school's superintendent there says all options are on the table, including arming teachers.
Clio Superintendent Fletcher Spears is looking over several options to increase security at the schools. One option being arming teachers.
I don't think the teachers should be wearing the firearm. It needs to be kept in a safe place.
Well, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's a big responsibility to put on teachers.
Spears says a teacher carrying a gun isn't his first choice, but all options are on the table. He says he would rather have an officer standing guard. Right now, Clio Middle School is the only school in his district to have a trained safety officer.
I think the teachers have a lot more love for their kids and are willing to put themselves in front of a shooter more so than the police are.
Okay. David Krim with Michigan Education Association says a majority of the teachers don't support carrying a gun.
I think that the gun situation in this country is out of control. I don't think the solution is to add more guns.
Fletcher says he's also looking at mental health services, metal detectors, and sections of the building he can specifically lock down.
We got to do something to protect the kids.
And that was ABC 12's Matt Whitco's reporting. We welcome now to Newsmaker the superintendent of the Lapeer Community Schools, Matt Wandry, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dawn.
I imagine as a superintendent and watching everything that's been unfolding around the country with the school shootings that there is concern in your district. Do you think something like that could happen in your district?
Well, you know, it's one of those instances you hope you never have to manage through as a district administrator, but certainly we can't, as adults, be naive to the possibility. And so it's certainly fortified our efforts to recommit to examining what our practices and procedures are, to examine if they really are the most appropriate. And I can certainly tell you that I probably share this fear with most superintendents, that we have many sleepless nights in concert with law enforcement officials that are charged with providing security to really ask ourselves honestly, have we done all we can?
And not only are you a superintendent, but you're a parent as well. So, you have
teens,
concerns, on both sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I say this when we engage our community in these conversations, that, I come to the job as a dad first, and the hat that we wear as district administrators or a superintendent or a teacher, it's not more important than the emotion that we can empathize with them, how they feel as parents. And parents' number one concern on a daily basis is that their son or daughter comes home at the end of the day. And it's unfortunate in our society that where education is almost a luxury. Right. Certainly we want a quality education for each of our young people, but we can't learn if students don't feel safe and secure, and staff don't feel safe and secure. If they don't feel that those charged with their security are doing all they can, and they're in an environment where they can learn and work effectively, we're not going to get a whole lot done.
And in wake of the latest shooting there in Parkland, Florida, what concerns have you heard from your staff and from parents as well? This seems to be kind of a watershed moment. Students are becoming more engaged, looking for change. So what have you heard from your parents and staff?
It's interesting you asked that question, Don, because I would agree. I've been a district administrator for a number of years, and I too feel that this particular incident is changing the conversation in our nation, and perhaps we have a greater capacity to hear what some of the solutions are. I have spoken the last several days with a number of our students very directly in the form of school assemblies. So our law enforcement partners, the City of Lapeer Police Department, the County Sheriff's Department, our local sheriff and police chief have joined me in having a very frank and direct conversations with our students and staff, and articulating a couple of different points. Number one, what are we going to do to reevaluate our current safety and security measures? What improvements might we consider? But also asking the students very directly, what do you think? What are measures when you walk in the door every day? What are things that happen or that procedures that we have in place that make you feel safe? And likewise, what are things that we could improve upon?
And also, and just to add to that, having the students respect the safety measures that are in place. I was a parent of teenagers, and they want to sneak out and go get fast food, so they go to the one door on the side, stick a rock in it, get in the car, and drive. And so when you do that, it's like the breach, the breach of security. So once you put those measures in place, they have to be willing to respect those measures as well.
Well, a fantastic point, and one that we gloss over too easily is that who's going to make a bigger difference in the security security of these large buildings. Is it 3 or 4 administrators, 1 school resource officer, a few teachers, or 800 plus students? And so discussing with students, having a greater awareness, understanding that their actions do have consequences. And at 14, 15, 16 years old, we don't often think about long-term consequences. So just being honest with kids about the threat that some of their behaviors may produce is a really important thing, and give young people the benefit of the doubt that they, once engaged in this conversation, can act accordingly. And I can tell you, I've been an educator for 20 years, and in the 2 school assemblies we've recently had at our middle school and our junior high school, 700 plus teenagers in a room, and you could hear a pin drop. Our students are absolutely engaged in this issue. They want to know what the adults are going to do, but they also want to have expectations for their own behavior. And they know that some of the things they do are wrong or inappropriate. They just need an avenue of a different choice, and we have to provide that for them.
And so, you know, as you look at reinforcing your security measures, is everything on the table for your district as well? Would you consider, you know, armed security or even arming teachers, or is everything on the table?
You know, I think it really has to be. One of the things that we've wanted to avoid in this conversation with the community is the retreat to the national talking points on this issue. We have a lot of adults talking over each other, talking at each other, and I'm telling you, it's really getting tiresome. We have students that desperately, and parents who desperately desire solutions. And so for us to automatically retreat to these talking points in complete disregard for a solution that we might not be comfortable with really does the students a disservice. So not only is every option on the table, but you have to engage the community and the parents in that discussion. And I told the kids this morning, I just left Zemmer Middle School, if the adults in this nation could have solved this problem, we already would have done it. So obviously, the approach we're using isn't as effective as we had hoped, and let's consider all options. I am not a security expert, I'm an educator. So I bring in the experts in security and law enforcement that have the pedigree and the expertise to have this conversation, but also to what end will the parents and students accept that? That's a different conversation, because what makes a school secure doesn't necessarily make it comfortable. And safety and security are sometimes the enemy of comfort. And we actually had that discussion with kids this morning, that we may have to give up some of those creature comforts of coming and going as we please to make the building more secure. And I can make the front of the building as secure as possible. But I've got 60 plus entrances and exits at my high school. So fortifying one entrance and having all kinds of security and locks and adults, you know, focusing on that one entry is great. But what are the 1,000 plus students who are responsible for maintaining security in the remainder of the building going to do to contribute to making it a secure facility? That's a big question.
And it is indeed, with no easy answers.
That's right.
With no easy answers. And you talked about engaging parents in the community. Tell us about this forum you have planned for later this month.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about it. One of the things that our communications department in the school district has become a bit concerned about is the number of communications going out on social media, a lot of the misinterpretations of what currently exists in terms of safety and security at the district, but yet a greater conversation needs to be had about what we can do to improve. Oftentimes, parents will make the assumption that we're not doing enough, but yet it's just basic ignorance of knowing what we are doing. So it's an opportunity to educate and inform, but also legitimately engage them in some questions that we can apply to solutions.
And we have the information there on our screen about when and where. So tell us when and where this forum, it's for parents and community members, will take place. Yep,
anybody can come, and students are likely to participate as well. March 13th, 6:30 p.m. At Lapeer High School. And we at present have it scheduled for our auditorium, but may move to a larger facility like our gymnasium to accommodate a larger crowd. Yeah.
Superintendent Wandry, never enough time to get it all in on this program, but I sure appreciate you coming in and sharing with us, you know, some of the things that your district is doing to ensure the safety of its students and staff.
Thanks for the opportunity, Don. We appreciate it.
And when Newsmaker returns, we'll sit down with active shooter trainers. We'll be right back. This is Newsmaker, and I'm your host, Dawn Jones. Today, we're focusing in on how we stay safe in shared spaces. Recently, in one school district, there was word of a threat on the school and students, but police worked overnight with the district to confirm that the school grounds were safe and students were safe, and classes went on as scheduled the following day. It was a team effort between law enforcement and school officials. ABC 12's Ann Perrette has more.
The school resource officer received notice of the threat around 10 o'clock Sunday night and immediately clocked in to begin the investigation, working until early this morning.
He's got more knowledge of any of those kids than anybody else, so he comes in on his own time. Well, we pay him, but he has to take off, get dressed, and go out.
Flushing Township Police Chief Brian Fairchild says the high school resource officer and Sunday night's patrol officer went to the homes of the students who sent the Snapchat referencing a threat to get information on where they heard about it.
It's been a long night for a lot of people.
Just hours later, at 5 this morning, the chief, his detective, and 2 officers from Flushing City Police, the superintendent, high school principal, and his 3 assistants met to discuss the investigation.
It's something you want to do right now. So when something like this happens, it's all hands on deck, and we do what we have to do to get the most information to make the most prudent decision.
They determined the threat wasn't credible. Regardless, Chief Fairchild is grateful it was reported.
I don't doubt some of these conversations took place before, but everybody just looked at the other person and said, you're not going to do that, and they walked away from it. Whereas now, the news is, kids are saying, hey, we need to speak up, which is a good thing.
But the chief admits it could become costly.
In 6 months from now, if this continues to happen, yeah, it's gonna drain somebody's budget. But you still are going to do the things you have to do to make that security there.
The cell phones of the students involved now go to the State Police Crime Lab to confirm what Flushing Township Police found. I'm Ann Perrette, ABC 12 News.
As we just learned there in Ann's story, communication is key when trying to determine if a threat is credible. And joining us now on today's Newsmaker is security trainer Mark Warren and Detective Sergeant Todd Elliott with the Battle Creek Police Department. And Todd, who was trained by Warren's company, is now training others in active shooter training. And we thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Mark, we'll start with you. Tell us about Strategos. That's your company, and what you do. It's a Missouri-based company, and we want to say we're very happy that you were able to make it here with us in Mid-Michigan today to talk about this subject, which many people are talking about. But tell us about your company and what you do there.
First, it's sad that this is what we do as a company, but we've been very fortunate. We started the company in 2002. My partner and I were both retired military law enforcement, and we were really just training police officers. And so at that time, we were already doing instructor level courses for police officers to be trained to go back to their agencies to train other police officers on how to respond to active shooters. But in 2007, we started branching out. We realized that the true first responder, the people that are on the scene when it starts, needed training as well. And that led us into providing security training services for churches, schools, businesses, healthcare, across the entire spectrum.
Okay, and you mentioned churches and schools and concert venues. All of those places have been victim of mass shootings just within the past year. How do we as ordinary citizens, though, protect ourselves in these shared spaces?
First and foremost, they have to be aware. They have to, one, accept that it can happen.
Is that the hardest part?
That is the hardest part. It really is. People they live in their communities, and it's a good community. And because of the everyday lives that we have, we never see that something like this could happen in our community, because in our everyday lives, it's not touched by that. But it doesn't mean it can't happen. We're a mobile society, for one thing. So people have the ability to move. I left from Chicago yesterday to be here today. So it's a very easy transfer for something bad to come into your community. But the big reality is the shooter typically comes from the community. He attacks a location made up of people that use that particular service in the community, who works there, but people from the community, and then who responds, but police, fire, and EMS from the community. And so sometimes I think that's the hard part, where we really don't realize how it will impact our community from top to bottom.
And Todd, you've benefited from the training of Mark's company, and tell us, what did you learn anything new or different on how to respond? You're a law enforcement official, you were already trained, but you had this additional training back in 2013. What did you learn?
Similar to what Mark and his company had found in relating it from law enforcement and or transitioning it rather over to schools, to the civilian side, is learning how they react, how they think, and how they respond in these situations, which is different than how we do it. We are trained tactically, we're trained with our firearms, we're trained with driving, we're trained with self-defense and defense tactics. Teachers are trained to teach, and understanding their mindset on it was key and still is key to being able to teach them effectively so that we know how to respond better and we can teach them to respond better as well.
Can you teach a person to remain calm? You know, active shooter training and active shooter, totally different. Can you teach people to remain calm and rely on their training in situations like that?
Every police officer in America is an example of that.
I mean, ordinary citizens, teachers,
I agree.
and
I
other
agree.
administrators who've been trained to teach
Yeah.
and not necessarily in security.
Well, then that's the reason I threw that out there was it's real easy to say, well, the police officers do it, but can we train others to do it? The reality is what they are underneath that uniform is just like everybody else. Maybe the mindset's a little bit different. Maybe they have more of a commitment to be a servant. But the reality is, it starts here in the heart. Am I willing to do? We ask them two questions. Is there someone in your life today that you're willing to die for? Mm-hmm. Second way to answer that is there someone in my life today that I'm willing to live for? And if I can answer that in the affirmative, in either side of that, that's the decision I have to make prior to understand going forward, from this point forward, I will not be that victim. Mm-hmm. And that really gives them, and then the training adds on to that. So it really is training. When you look at police officers coming into schools to train teachers, and that's what Todd was referring to, the mindset that we as police officers come in, we're always armed with a weapon. Mm-hmm. And so when we go into that environment, we try to teach them everything based on our perspective, but that doesn't work because they're not going to have the training, equipment, and knowledge that we have. They have to be trained differently, but when they receive the training, the word that we hear constantly when we train those teachers at the end is it was empowering. Okay. And if we are empowering them, then we've affected them in the way that they needed to be impacted.
And when Newsmaker returns in our final segment, we will continue our conversation and we'll talk about the hardest thing for ordinary people to grasp when they're going through training. We'll have Mark kind of walk us through the training, and we'll talk to Todd about training teachers and other administrators in his community on how to deal with a mass shooter or any type of violence that may break out in their school district. Newsmaker will return in just moments. Welcome back to today's Newsmaker. In this final segment, we continue our conversation on how we stay safe in the spaces that we all share. And we're joined today by Mark Warren and Sergeant Todd Elliott. And Todd, you are a law enforcement official from the Battle Creek Police Department, and you actually benefited from Mark's training, and now you are a trainer yourself. You go in and you train teachers on how to deal with an active shooter situation if it happens in their district. What's the hardest thing for these teachers who've been trained to educate students to grasp about this training?
Well, teachers by nature, from what we've found, are protectors of the kids anyway. That's just in their nature. And seeing how their minds work, they're actually very similar to the police, which makes it easier for us. However, the hardest thing that we see they have to do is be able to flip that switch and go from the teaching and loving and caring for the kids to an actual active protective role when you have a dangerous, volatile situation unfolding.
Did they ever talk about in the Parkland, Florida shooting, it was actually a student that many of the teachers knew and had actually instructed. Do the teachers ever share any concerns with you about what if it's someone we know? We can't believe Johnny has a gun. I mean, you know, you have to kind of get over that.
And they do, and we specifically address that in the training, is these shooters are people that belong to this school. They're your students that are the attackers in this, and you have to be mentally prepared to deal with that. And it may and will be a very dangerous situation. And just getting over that mindset on it, and from start to finish on the training, the teachers feel vulnerable and helpless at the beginning of it. When we show them some of what's happened in the past, by the end of it, they're empowered. They feel they have the tools they need and the understanding they need to be able to effectively protect themselves and their students.
Now, Mark, tell us about the training it provides. Very quickly, just kind of walk us through the training and what it entails.
We certified the officers typically to teach a 4-hour training block. And in that 4-hour training block, we have a lecture that talks about past history, why we need to do this. And then we get into the actual response modes, and that's 3 outs. We teach 3 outs, principally based. It's get out, lock out, or take out, not in any particular order. So once we get through that, we take them for a walkthrough through the school. We go to several different classrooms, and what we do is we show them the 3 outs for this particular space. How would I lock this area out? Does the door open in or out? What type of door handle do I have? Can I lock the door from inside, or can I only lock it from the hallway? Once we do that, we teach them how to properly barricade. We want them to always lock, layer, reinforce. Don't trust a keyed lock alone. So also we're teaching them there to stay focused on the solution, not what could happen, but stay focused on the solution. Then we take them through, do I have an out capability? If I barricade my door and my lockdown is failing, how would I get out of this space? And if I get out, where would I go? Who goes first? So we've got to walk through all of that. And then we look at the improvised weapons that are in the room for that takeout option. And it's a lot, I think that alleviates a lot of the concerns that they have, because they know that the gunman or the intruder is using a weapon, and they're having to use what they can find around them. But by taking them through the simplistic ideas of what could be used and how to direct their students, we don't train students, we train them to direct the students at that time. And it gives them that sense of, now I understand what can be done and how it's going to work. Then we do scenarios with them. That's where they pull it all together. Okay. So they actually have to kind of have, I play the role of the bad guy, or Todd plays the role of the bad guy, and then we don't let them use the lock. They only keep us out by barricading and doing those things, and that's where it all gets pulled together. And by the end of it, they're laughing and high-fiving.
Because they were successful, and you know, right. Now, do you recommend, or do you think that it's going to become a point in time where ordinary citizens, Dawn Jones, news anchor, I want to take some active shooter training because I like concerts, I like going to the mall, and I just want to be safe. Do you think that there's going to come a time when ordinary citizens are going to start asking for this type of training?
Definitely. We see it all the time. We're doing that. We do it for corporate clients, a lot of different areas and venues. But the problem is, I think most people look at this as, this is a law enforcement problem. Hey, I just got to call 911. And see, that's part of the problem. With the advent of 911 in the mid-70s, people started kind of giving up their security because that's supposed to get the police, fire, EMS to be faster. So, hey, now they're going to be here in 5 minutes. They forget, what about that gap? What will I do until they get here?
In that 5 minutes.
Right. So learning what to do is imperative. There's a lot of different models out there. Each has advantages and disadvantages. We teach what we do because we believe in it, we tested it, but at the same time, awareness is the first. Behavioral indicators are another. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, a person makes you feel uncomfortable, listen to that intuition.
All right. I want to thank you, gentlemen. As I mentioned, this time goes way too fast, but thank you for all the information that you've shared with us today. Very enlightening, and I'm sure our viewers took a lot away from our conversation today. And we want to thank our viewers for joining us today, and until next time, I'm your host, Dawn Jones.